Welcome to the Getting High on Leadership series featuring Paul Karasik. Paul is one of America's top management consultants helping leaders succeed. He is the author of 9 books, including Sweet Persuasion and Brilliant Thoughts and Provocative Questions. His insights appear regularly in major publications, and he is one of the most sought-after executive coaches. Paul founded the American Seminar Leaders Association and the Psychedelic Institute of Los Angeles. He is a popular speaker at national conferences and has been on stages across all 50 states and internationally. Paul's work addresses the question, how can we transform conflict in business into collaboration? With decades of experience in management, leadership, and psychedelics, he brings a unique perspective on personal and societal growth. In this series, we'll be discussing his latest book, Getting High on Leadership, The Leader's Guide to Higher Consciousness. We'll be exploring the concepts, techniques, and mindset required to revolutionize leadership. Enjoy. Welcome back to the Getting High on Leadership series. My name is Rob Sanchez, and we're joined once again by Paul Karasik. We're working our way through the book today, and we're on Chapter 2 of Part 1. Chapter 2 is called The Calling. Paul, what is the calling? How does a prospective leader find that calling or start to listen to it?
Great question. What is a calling? I think that definition is important before we talk about this. A calling is different than a job. A calling is different than something you do that's going to get some sort of reward, right? A calling is something that is purpose-driven. It's mission-driven. It's vision-driven. It's inspired. It's not a question of not doing it because it's so innate and it's so relevant. And I think all of us have a calling. And that calling is to create a life for us, a conscious life for ourselves, and express the highest nature that's within us. That's what we came here for. And that calling is universal. I think I think there's a lot of people who are reading this book that have the calling and hence were attracted to even the title and the idea of raising consciousness is a key piece. So,
Right.
This calling comes knocking on us. And the calling may not be about, let's say somebody's watching this and they own a shoe factory and they're making shoes. The calling is not about now he's going to go and teach consciousness and meditation and whatever the case may be. No, it's not about that. The calling has nothing to do with that. The calling is how we are being present in the moment in whatever we're doing. That's what the calling is. The calling is to be present, conscious, in the moment.
Right. While you're doing your life and everything that comes up, huh?
Yeah, and Rob, this is true meditation. This is true meditation when we're living from that higher level of consciousness. And you know where it comes from? There was a young guy, he came up to me at the Awakening Conference, and for some weird reason, he thought I knew something. And he... Yeah, it was like, wait a minute, you're starting on a bad premise here. I'm doing the best I can, just like you. But he felt like, that I knew something about life or whatever. And he said, Paul, what is that secret to getting to a higher level of consciousness? And I had to really think, was it meditation? Was it, going to Buddhist retreats, studying the Bhagavad Gita, studying Buddhism, all things that I've done. And I said, to get to that higher level of consciousness, there's only one thing that gets you there, and that's suffering. And I hated to tell him that, Rob. I really, because he was such a good kid, like I didn't want
Not
to
trying
blow
to
his
shatter
neck.
anything.
No, he
Yeah.
thought, like if I do this, or if I take that psychedelic, or whatever the case may be, that all of a sudden I'll be transformed. When it doesn't really work that way. Transformation happens really when we suffer, and that's when we get the calling.
That's that Buddhist, the Buddhist principle, right? Dukkha is the suffering and pain and unease that can lead you, that leads you through.
That leads you to not suffering.
Yes, yeah.
And the only way you can not suffer is to do your calling.
Right. Find that thing that's resonating within you, fulfilling that universal constant, that need to provide and do what you can, but it needs to resonate with your core, and kind of match your character.
Well, 30 years of management consulting work, helping corporations build teams, build structure, build business plans, working with these leaders for so many years, I see that the ones who that have a passion for the moment, not for the outcome, do the best.
Right. They're really present in that moment, always striving to do what they can.
But they begins
in real
with
time.
that. Yeah, they're right in that moment. They're reacting, and but suffering. Going back to that point, suffering leads us to an awakening. And I mean, like in your own life, I think you've had consciousness raising experience and so on, but wasn't it the suffering that led you there?
Yeah, I think there's always there are always obstacles to every stage or next level of life, I think, and when you're in those obstacles, it can be hard to appreciate them for what they are. But in hindsight, it's very easy, it seems, to call out and say, hey, okay, those two difficult things really got me here, or I wouldn't have accomplished X if I had not Y. You kind of can put that together with the hindsight, right? That 2020 makes it very clear to you. But I think having the mindfulness and the awareness to acknowledge when you're within that obstacle, and using that as inspiration to keep going, or to, not lose direction, as it can be done in bigger projects, is key. And really having that self-awareness.
And so it brings us to, this is an important chapter because it brings us to the very kernel of the whole book, which is what is conscious leadership? What is conscious leadership? And how do we perform conscious leadership? On two outcomes. One, obviously for results, but also for harmony within the organization. And
right.
So
it's about building better people and teams,
along
with better business.
better business happens automatically. It's
Yeah.
not that when people are getting along, better business ideas. When people are less stressed, they're more creative. When people who are really enjoying what they're doing and working with you or for you, whatever the case may be, then you get more done. Just the mistreatment of employees by employers, causing them to get fired. Again, this has been my life's work, Rob, for 30 years. That firing, that quit, that losing of that person cost that company about $500,000. If it's a mid-level, if it's up at the top, it's a couple million.
Just with time
Just
on
with
task, knowledge,
looking,
connection.
search, HR department, you add up all those numbers, and it's about $500,000. That's a mid-level manager. Loss of business, loss of time, engagement, interviews, actual cost with a headhunter. It could be $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 just with the headhunter.
can really
Wouldn't
create
it
a
be
void.
wouldn't it be much more smarter if you really wanted to have a great thriving business to keep your employees? Because every time you lose one, you're screwed.
Yes, right. And retaining those employees and retaining a positive culture and kind of a good workplace for that psychological safety and that innovation that, employees and managers want to have to feel good about their roles. If when you look at it on paper like that, it makes it pretty obvious what the right decision is. But sometimes it's not the easy decision, which I think
No,
is why we see those firings.
no, I one of my clients has been with me for many years at a financial firm, an investment firm. I've trained all of his people over many, many years, like 10 or 15 years. Every time we'd get new people, or every 6 months, we do a little sales and leadership type of an event. And I did a training down in San Diego one day. He called me down. Let's do a little fresh up, that type of thing. I said, great. And so my events are very participatory. You've been to some of the stuff that I do, and certainly in my corporate work, it's been like that too. Very interaction. So at one point in this workshop, I said, "Hey, who's got a great idea? Who's doing this really well?" And his top guy was in there. The guy that he only had a team of maybe 6 real high-level sales executives, and his top guy was there, who was doing in numbers on paper almost as much as the other 4 or 5. Okay, that he was that good. So I turned to him at one point during the workshop and I said, well, what do you do how do you handle that? Why don't you share that? Because again, I like to bring in all the information, not just what I know. And he said, I don't want to share that. Well, first of all, everybody on that team had territories. So even if he shared it with somebody, it's not going to do anything to his territory, right? From a financial point of view, right?
Right.
The guys in New York, you're giving him the tip.
Edge.
Yeah. I mean, so from that point of view, it didn't make any sense. And I said, wow. And I was like really taken aback because I don't get that a lot, in doing my work, usually, especially with your own team. Like sometimes I'm in events where there's 5 or 10 or 20 companies and yeah, I get it, and people want to guard their words, but this is the same team, right? So I'm like, okay. About 2 months later, I call Sal and I said, Sal, how's the team doing? I was just doing my debrief, from the event. And I said, how's this particular guy doing? And he said, I fired him. I said, what? He said, yeah, I fired him. I said, Sal, you're a sales guy. He was responsible for like about 3/4 of the sale, or at least half, certainly, of the whole team of 5 or 6 people. That took a lot of guts. He said there was no choice. When he didn't want to share in a meeting like that and help the entire team, there's no place for him.
Yeah, really not bringing that team mindset or that servant leadership mindset to the stage.
Yeah, no, consciousness is never. You can never go bad with consciousness. So I was asking him to illuminate something that was consciousness, right? And that's leadership. You see, to stand by. No, we don't have a team that doesn't share. Our team, we share every day. What are you using to get? How's this working? All that stuff. And so when we talk about integrity, so where does integrity come from? Let's talk about that. Now, in this chapter, the calling, there's a particular symbol that the words take. And this ankh showed up almost exactly the way it's printed on the page here.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty clear.
It was like wow.
Once you see it.
Oh, wow. I just, I'm not a big synchronicity and I know it's happening. I just don't get into it. But this was like, whoa, look at
when
that.
When the key of life presents itself, at least
it was
acknowledge
like,
that.
Yeah, and I moved a couple little words or things around. But what you see on page 13 of the book is literally when I did Justify Center, right? And why did the Ankh show up in this chapter? Well, because the Ankh is a symbol for it's the person. You have the little head and the line. And what is the Ankh? The Ankh is, and then there's a line across the person, right? There's a line. So you have the Ankh, and most people know what an Ankh looks like. It's a little loop on top, and then there's a line across it.
Right.
What is that? That is the death of the ego. So the person, the personhood, the Rob, the Paul, the identified personality that we've taken and become identified with has to die. It has to die in order for consciousness to arise.
Right. You have to
So
get through that cycle.
when a leader walks into a situation and has that ego under control, and he's not coming from, or she's coming from I, but it's a we, and this is the best for, and he doesn't have to get his way or her way, and it's got to be my way and my, all that ego stuff. What I've seen over 30 years of doing this work is that it's always the same. It's always the same. It's never a different problem. I've never come into, and I've done like hundreds of these jobs.
Yeah, it's not like suddenly there's this new human problem that you can work on solving.
No.
It's that age-old human nature issue just rearing its head in different businesses.
It's never anything. When I go into any dysfunctional company, organization, team, it's always the same.
Yeah.
So the calling can't arise when it's I, me, mine. The calling you can't get in touch with consciousness when you're in that self-absorbed mode of the ego.
Yes, and from that perspective, it feels like suffering or some small death to put those ego concerns aside for the greater picture. So I think the Ankh symbolism and some of the deepities of this passage are definitely there to explore.
If you remove your ego as a leader, it's such a weird, and we'll get into this later in the book, but by lowering that, they keep putting you higher. Like look at a Gandhi. Lower. He's like it. I mean, now Gandhi is the symbol of great leadership, of everything, and everything he did was lower. I wear a loincloth. I don't own anything. I eat a bowl of rice a day. He was a big lawyer in London. He wasn't a street guy. He wasn't an urchin or something, But he just put his ego down. He put his ego down, and then something happened. And we see that reflected in different spiritual texts and so on. And it's not a matter of we don't operate without an ego. It's just an ego is not leading us, and the ego is not dominating, and that there's consciousness that's allowed to work through the ego. And then we express the calling. Then we manifest the calling. But as long as the ego is there, the calling can't manifest. And that, like you say, it's a paradox. The smaller I make myself, the bigger I get.
Yes, and there's no end game. You haven't answered the question on this one. This is a lifelong lesson and endeavor.
Oh yeah.
And definitely a noble one for
It's
leaders.
every minute. It's when people hurt your feelings. It's when people say things like, "Oh, Rob, your podcast's not that good." And
I've heard it before.
No. I'm sure you haven't. You do a great job. But when they do say something like that, it's like, wow, or Paul, I don't, I don't like your music. It's terrible. Ouch. But if I get my ego out of the way, wow, I don't like a lot of music. And they're fine musicians, right. But like not everything appeals to me. And that person could be my best friend, but not like my music. It's not, it doesn't have to like my music, to be my friend.
Yeah,
And
there's a degree of stoicism there, removing yourself from that emotion. Obviously, feeling it first. You don't want to ignore it.
Oh yeah, no.
But then
there's
it's not resting on it and
no.
shifting your worldview around it or ruminating and being free then to just continue on your path towards trying to express your calling.
And then that insane need for the leader to hold a position, and when you read this chapter, it's not about that. It's not about holding a position, and that's why in the little chapter with the conscious leader answers the call to grow, to heal, to teach, to create, to express, to awaken, to serve. Because all those things happen when the ego, so getting that, that ego,
Yes.
then it happens.
So kind of the takeaway points for this chapter are really to turn inward, realize where your ego is limiting you or where that ego has been out of control at times in the past, and start to listen in for what that calling really is, whether it be what you're doing already or maybe it's something entirely different that you feel drawn to do, but trying to lock in on what that is so that you can make those conscious steps in your small habits and with your own ego awareness to kind of open that door.
Yeah, this idea that we have a calling and that calling will manifest when we allow the ego to take a lesser role and to allow consciousness to work through our ego. When consciousness allows us to see those things that the ego would normally respond to, we get much less reactive through the awareness that we're practicing.
Easier said than done for this week's take-home work. Yeah,
Right.
Definitely. I hope you guys enjoyed this chapter and have some food for thought, some things to think about on that drive home today. And we'll be back again next week with Chapter 3. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Getting High on Leadership series. If you have any questions, you can comment below or send them in via email to paul@paulkarasik.com. Follow him on Instagram at PK_the conversation. Find out more at wholesalerinstitute.com and psychedelic-awakening.com. To get the most out of this series, find the ebook link below and read along with us. The Getting High on Leadership series is produced by Rob Sanchez and Apartment 113, which can be found at apartment113.com and followed on Instagram at APT_113.